Hello. The title of my presentation is Proposing a Model and Framework for Translation Quality Assessment. Translation study has been the host of many different theories, description, and application, and the question of the quality of translation is regarded as its first priority. Generally, TQ is considered as expressing an opinion or judgment on the basis of estimating equality, nature, and value of a translation in terms of its corresponding original text. But the main problem and difficulty is that how can be possible measuring and expressing the quality of translation? Assessing the quality of translation definitely needs a definable, functional, and testable model. A famous model of TQ is related to Julian House. This model is originated from a Holiday's systematic functional grammar, pragmatic theory, discourse analysis, stylistic, and the theory of register, along with the notion which is stood on the Prague School of Language and Linguistics. House's model has been criticized for confusing and a scientific jargon. In fact, according to Vermeer, this model makes the translation functionally equivalent. On the other hand, it is against the functional equivalent. In addition, three different schools suggested different approaches for assessing the quality of translation: mentalist view, behavioral approaches, text-based approaches. These views contain four different approaches: literature-oriented approaches, comparative literature, postmodernist and constructionalist approaches, philosophy and sociology, and functionalistic scopus-related approaches, action and reception. And number four is linguistically oriented approaches or linguistics. Linguistically oriented approaches, in contrast with other approaches that reduced and played on the importance of accounting the necessity of a direct relationship between source text and target text, stress on preserving the syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic structure of source text, and the function of and quality of TT must be compared with its corresponding original text to the extent of keeping the function and quality of source text in terms of regarding its linguistic features. In here, we must mention the way of distinguishing translation quality assessment from translation criticism. In fact, cultural studies in 19th century turned the focus of translation from what translation is to what translation do. In post-structuralist approaches, the term original was challenged and target text turned to meta text, and the source text turned to proto text. So uh, as mentioned before, TQ is very essential because we can make border within translation and other products and preserve the legal legitimized right of both translator and writer or author. So in here, these three subjects can be raised. Translator is a cannibalist, a writer or translator. What is the job or responsibility of translator? Is translator a writer or a translator? Must we categorize works into untranslatable and translatable? What conditions rule on translatability? Writing in any type is a job and responsibility of writer and not translator, and translator must translate as the initiator or as the preserver of the amount of meaning, information, and message of the linguistic materials of the corresponding original text. Translator must consider the extent and degree of translatability of a particular word for acting as a translator. Generally, translatability or untranslatability can be answered by these questions. Does this work or original work contains new information and message for translation? Does this work have same or similar context and audiences or readers in target language? Does the translation of this work face the dominated social, political, ideological rules, bans, and restrictions of target context or not? Does the translator can act as a translator or not? Does translator or publisher get the permission of translation from the writer or author of the original text or book or not? So in here it is very important proposing a new definition of translation and determining a maximum that a translator can act as a translator, not as a rewriter. On the basis of the concept of TQA, the researcher proposed adapted translation, which is totally different from what the other scholars of PS until now have been proposed. It is as a result of the translational situation that the translator uses the translational procedure, which rewriting is not mixed up with it. Therefore, the scale of translation starts from ideal translation to adapted translation in terms of considering TQA's perspective. So in here again, ideal translation is in ideal translation, the form, meaning, message, and readability fluency of the original linguistic material is completely preserved in translation. On the other hand, adapted translation, in adapted translation, the translation is not affected by rewriting using the translational procedure, that rewriting is not mixed up with it. So we must also, as I mentioned before, distinguish the act of writer from the act of translator. So in here we focus on the act of writer, which can be illustrated as a scale started from rewriting to adapted writing and ended with writing as a result of producing a completely new work. So we must distinguish those translational procedures that rewriting is not mixed up with them from other translational procedures mixed up with rewriting. As these above examples show, a translator just can act as a translator, cannot be a writer. Paraphrasing or producing an original utterance relates to the writer's or author's scope of writing, but translator must be limited to the translation of writer's work and uses those translational strategies that rewriting is not mixed up with them. So the researcher proposes these translational procedure which writing is not mixed up with them. In my opinion, Newmark's third type of obligatorship, along with Newmark's transference, naturalization, culture equivalent, but just for idioms and proverbs, as using as when a translator uses a bilingual dictionary for for finding the referential meaning of a particular word from target language. In here, cultural equivalent is just for idioms and proverbs as total equivalent side. So synonymy, reduction, expansion through translation, equivalent, footnote, glossary, and deletion. It should be noted that usage of footnote like glossary of translator must be considered as a supplementary and compensatory of the other strategy for establishing the equivalency. Bad range translation as a threshold of bad with good translation can be identified by the linguistic properties and translational strategies. Take these examples. For example, misspelling translator perform a misspelling, the message is not so understandable. So we can decide that in terms of regarding the translation quality assessment, the translation is a bad translation because of the message is not understandable due to misspelling and the lack of rationale by using trans-rewriting or using equivalent instead of using synonym, or not using obligatory shift, or not using shift, or using performing a translation as a result of the grammatical error. So totally translation can be divided into three types: good range translation as a result of performing an ideal translation, or adapted translation with weakness in appropriately choosing procedures but completely understandable, adapted translation with mistakes or errors, understandable but with misspelling and or grammatical error and the like, middle level translation as a result of performing a translation mixed up with rewriting, and bad range translation, which is the result of the rewriting or substitution, or can be considered as partially not totally understandable, and the like. Understanding is not based on the ordinary definition by comparing with the original or by previous statement or by reading the whole text and predicting an understanding. In fact, it is based on its academic linguistic notion. For example, understanding which is achieved by realizing the part of the speech predicting the misspelling or error, if it is possible, which can be done by an expert analyzer or assessor in the scope of the linguistic unit of translation. So, therefore, it's completely natural categorizing translation in terms of regarding the ideal translation which is mixed up with rewriting, understandable or not, or this is the right or wrong message. The unit of translation is token or anything that is uttered and can be separately produced, and also can be regarded as an independent structure that individually contains meaning, information, and message. It can be so an echo sound word to a clause and sentence. In the process level analysis of translation, a good translation may not be completely achieved for the total text or book. In addition, a good translation is a range. The ideal translation based on considering TQ's perspective and a scale can be placed at the first, and weakness in properly choosing the translational strategy, that writing is not mixed up with it, can be placed at the end of this scale. After taking the step of process analysis, the table of product-oriented analysis is provided by the researcher, so which consists of 6 vital factors. So number one is the question of the whole main information and message of each heading and the total of the text, or each chapter and the total of the book are preserved or not. Yes or no. Why? Rational explanations. And number two is determining the result of process-oriented analysis. For example, 50% of linguistic materials were transferred in a good range, thus the whole translation moves toward good. Number three is any chapter or heading deleted, added, or the order of headings or chapter changed, yes or no, or rational explanations. Number four is, do you think this product contains new information? Add new information to your experience in your current context, or is this translation can be regarded as a new experience of reading for your readers in their current context or not? And number 5 is, do you think this product performs a good act at the semiotic level or not? And do you think the ignorance and the lack of substitution at this level affects understanding the TT in comparison with source text using an intersemiotic model and framework? Yes or no rational explanation. And number 6 is, with unified rational interpretation in terms of comparatively, objectively describing, explaining, interpreting, totally this translation as a product moves toward good or bad in terms of regarding these 5 vital factors. So in here, the model of TQA can be illustrated in this way as a triangulated model. The relationship between the translation quality assessment and translation criticism is preserved, and also proto-text and meta-text return to their old name as source text and target text. So and the relationship between the ST and TT was preserved in a direct manner. So translation criticism must not be separated from TQA, and the scope of quality must not be invaded by rewriting. As Newmark's and Vinay Darwell's translational procedure indicated, rewriting was mixed up with some of their translational strategies, such as in adaptation strategy proposed by Vinay and Darwell, and in compensation, componential analysis, modulation, functional equivalent paraphrase strategy, and synonymy of Newmark. The act of translation must not be appropriated as the act of writer, since the writer is free for returning his or her pen whatever he or she wants, but translator is restricted by the properties of the text of writer and must limit him or herself to the amount of meaning, information, message, and ideology that the linguistic structure of original text reflect. Giving information how and why is the job first responsibility of writer, not translator. Thus, TQ is the main core of TS, which is the host of many different theories of keeping equivalency, and as a science must not be deviated by elusively legitimizing the act of rewriting as translation. It must be practically showed through applying the translational strategies, which rewriting is not mixed up with them. The nature and identity of TQA is to condemn any act of rewriting or writing, and consequently not legitimizing the act of rewriting as translation. So it's important to see TQA of a translation in a scale that being good or bad form is two wings, and also it is important defining a scale of translation for translator to act as a translator, not a rewriter. And also it is important to give TQA the qualitative, descriptive, comparative, interpretive, and critical values rather than only introducing it by rating. As is usual, TQA may be naturally time-consuming, but is very useful, functional, and reliable, especially for using in the scientific and academic areas. In here, some questions can be raised, such as, must translator abandon or sacrifice their responsibility or job just for the sake of injecting information into target context? As a conclusion of this study, TC as a tool of TQA must be significantly considered, and the suggested model the relationship between STTT is maintained on the basis regarding the principle of TQA that indicates the existence of a direct relationship between translation and its corresponding original text. TQA with using the rules and factors of TC as depicted in both product-oriented analysis and process-oriented analysis can be able to determine the orientation, the level of the quality of particular translation. This model with this framework are very useful, functional for a student of translation quality assessor, and this study can be also applicable in the area of pedagogy. Thank you.